All right, so I did a game jam recently that was a RTS kind of wave tower defense game, and I had two units that were spawned in that I wanted to create sound effects for that were similar because they are both units, and so they're different from placing structures or activating different UI panels. But I also wanted to have some differences between the two of them to show that they are two different units with two different ability sets, two different aesthetics, two different kind of styles. So I will play both of them first so you can kind of get an idea of what the two of them sound like, and then I'll break down the similarities and the differences between the two of them and how you can accurately make similar sounds not sound overly similar. So here's the warrior, and then here's the farmer. So as you could hear, there was a couple of little sounds that should jump out to you. The first one is the one that I kept between both of them, and that is the dirt moving sound. There are two different textures I used. One of them was more impacty. The other one was a little softer. And these were to represent the fact that these units were being placed onto the ground. It is pretty common across most RTS games that when units are spawned, like placed by mouse onto the game, that there is a certain like dirt sound or whatever if they're spawning on concrete or tile, there's a sound to show that you are placing them onto the ground. I also added a bit of a sound that I use for a lot of the UI. It's a little wood tap sound. I used part of it for like most buttons and stuff, so that's kind of adding a little bit of a different texture that is more representing the fact that this is a unit that is spawned by the player as opposed to just spawning in randomly. So it's kind of representing the fact that it's part of the UI umbrella. So sounding with the dirt, playing with that with the dirt sound like this. It's super duper low in the mix. You can barely hear it, but it adds just a little bit of extra color and texture. Lastly, on the similarities, I added a sound of clothes being placed into a backpack, which is very much just for Foley's sake, just to sound like there's clothes. It's not just feet. There's also a full body of person on top of those feet. Helps with that initial kind of impacty sound. A little bit of tail with some interesting tidbits in there as well. Some sticks, some other kind of things as part of that. But then, to discern the warrior from the farmer, I added a couple sounds that are unique to the warrior. In that, first off, the warrior is wearing armor, so he needs to have sounds to represent the armor and the various other gear. He's probably got some sort of belt with various weapons on it, and so that rattling sounds like this. It's not the highest quality sample, but I was working with free stuff in this particular case, and so that's what I had. I had two different samples of it. One a little higher, one a little lower, try to give it a bit of a fuller sound. Next, obviously, this warrior is carrying some sort of weapon, and as cliche as it is, I don't think necessarily games should not have cliches in them. Very often, sound design is about playing what you would expect to hear in a certain circumstance. If you play a duck quacking whenever someone steps, it's not what you expect. You expect to hear a footstep representing the particular material that the person is stepping on. Same with the fact is whenever someone draws a sword, even though it does not make this fantastic sound, you have to throw it in, because if not, people are going to say, that was weird. I was expecting something else, and that kind of threw me for a loop. So here I added this. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more brought down in the mix. I didn't want this to be really overwhelming. But there definitely is a prominent tail of this that kind of rings out through the sound that I definitely wanted to keep, and it definitely helped kind of paint the picture that there was a sword that they were drawing. Then I added 3 different samples of a kind of a war call. This is only the tail end. There's lots of big yells throughout, but this is literally just once they stop yelling, it's just a very short burst. So that kind of represents a little bit more aggression than the sound effect for the voice I added for the villager. Kind of just adds a little bit more aggression to it. And then lastly, I added something that was kind of a inspiration from Age of Empires 3, I think. And that is the snare drum roll. Very cliche to have a war drum, or I guess like a marching drum, to kind of lead and represent that these are not just like random warriors, that these are like trained warriors in a legion or some sort of group. So that's what I had for the warrior spawn, and then for the farmer, I kept the dirt sounds the same, the wood impact, and then the foliage sounds. But I wanted to kind of draw on the idea that this was a farmer. This was someone brought in who was like working the fields, and then they got asked to help build a wall. So generally these farmers have animals that they're taking care of, like a goat, which I brought down pretty low because I didn't want the player to think that this was a goat unit being spawned. This was a farmer. So then I added a bell as well to kind of help represent that. And I tried to find I spent like 30, 40 minutes searching for an accurate bell sound that was kind of innocent sounding, kind of smaller, because any big bells sounded a bit too grandiose, and this is very much the opposite of grandiose is this unit. So then lastly, I added a little bit of a throat clearing sound that was supposed to represent the fact that this is a unit, not a goat. So obviously without the throat clearing, it sounds a little bit more like a goat, but with the throat clearing, it's a little harder to hear, but it helps kind of bring the goat down a little bit, add a little bit of a human element to it, and that helps kind of discern it from the warrior sound. And so obviously, to kind of summarize, I kept the dirt sounds, the impact sounds, the foley the same because they're both human units, but I added some armor and a sword and some kind of war calls and a snare to represent the fact that it's a warrior unit versus adding a goat sound, a bell, and a kind of only one person sound for the voice. So these are two ways that you can make units sound similar, is by keeping parts similar, but then adding other things to help kind of mentally prepare the player for what the unit is.